Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Friday webinar with Pioneer B1. We're always happy to put these webinars on for our community and for other SAP Business One clients so that we can review how-tos, tips and tricks, and give you more options to get more out of your SAP Business One system to help run your business better. My name is Ben Grassi. I'm a senior SAP Business One consultant with Pioneer B1, and my co-host today is Johanna Williams. Johanna, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Johanna, also go by Jo. I am a Business One consultant, and I'm very excited to get to show you some interesting stuff today. So hopefully that adds benefit and value to your business. And if you have any questions, let us know. So with that, should we get started?
Yes, great. Thank you, Johanna. So this year we've had webinars on a slew of different topics, from 1099 handling and managing financials to utilizing the Boyum dashboarding and even diving into the service module. All those past webinars, as always, are up on our YouTube page. Today, however, we're going to be focusing on several other commonly underutilized functions in SAP Business One that can really help you manage your agreements with customers and vendors better and provide a better overall experience to all of your business partners, as always, all within SAP Business One. Let's go ahead and start into our quick PowerPoint here, and then most of the webinar will be a live demonstration. So the objective for today is to review options within SAP Business One to manage agreements with your customers and vendors. We're going to be covering blanket agreements, recurring transactions, return materials authorizations, and service contracts. On the agenda, kind of what we just went through, but Johanna's going to start it off with sales and purchasing blanket agreements and covering recurring transactions. I'll be diving into return materials authorization, which you've probably also heard called return materials agreements, or RMA for short. A couple months ago, we talked about service contracts, and we're going to touch on them again today in a little bit different capacity. Throughout this, we'll be offering reporting options out of the box with SAP Business One in some ways that you can view this data without doing customizations. We'll wrap up with providing all the documentation and always end with some open Q&A so that we can make sure we get all your questions answered. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Johanna, who's going to start us off with blanket agreements here. And Jo, just let me know when you'd like to switch over into SAP.
Great. Thank you, Ben. So on the blanket agreements, what we're going to show you today is a document that is available on both the sales side and the purchasing side. So we have sales blanket agreements, purchase blanket agreements. These agreements are linked to various documents and reporting. As you can see from the PowerPoint here, we have documents, whether it be sales orders, deliveries, AR invoices, and then AP invoices, purchase orders. The business partner master data has links to this, and recurring transactions will have links to this, and we also have an agreement fulfillment report section for these blanket agreements. So let's get into SAP to show you these blanket agreements. Thank you, Ben. All right, so we'll start here with the sales under the sales AR and look at the sales blanket agreement. So the sales blanket agreement can be a document that we can say, for example, has benefits for negotiation, for binding contracts or agreements. And this is specific to special pricing, possibly items, sales volumes, quantities, and all negotiated for a specific period of time for a specific business partner. So I'll go ahead and walk through an example here. And when we come into the blanket agreement, we have a selection for our business partner. That is our customer. And we can select that information, which brings in the business partner master data default information for that business partner. Again, this is going to be an example that I'm going to show regarding agreement method, as it's part of the blanket agreements. Here we get to decide whether this is going to be for an item method, which means that it is specific to items. So you are agreeing upon certain items fulfilling, as well as quantities fulfilling. Monetary methods will look in the purchasing side, which are more of a total value amount. So we'll leave that for items. We'll let's go ahead and put an end date here. So I'm going to do for 12 months. These agreements are, again, custom to you. So if you have an agreement that's for multiple years, your end date will reflect that there. And down on the general tab, another important field in the blanket agreement is your agreement type, which is general or specific. The general means that, again, you're just going to be doing a general items agreement. It's nothing else. The specific, however, which we'll look at on this example, is specifically for a special pricing. And this is going to be on a higher level than the special business partner pricing that we have for this account. So if we're going to create a document based on this agreement, when I set this up, this specific agreement will be at a higher hierarchy than the business partner special pricing. And I'll show you that here in a second. Let's go ahead and fill out the payment terms. We'll do the status is important as well. We default at draft on this document. However, you want to switch it to approved so that it is an active status, and that means you can use it throughout the system. You do have a section to remind you that there will be a renewal at the end date, which is 12 months here, and you could set that renewal and have it remind you 5 days prior. Under the remarks, I like to say that you can put terms and conditions or any kind of agreement, a term that states, what this is about. So whether there's specific reasons for this agreement, this can be laid out here. So now going into the details tab, we can select our item, and our item can be selected for, let's see, let me select an item here. Okay, let's do this one. Okay, so this item, I'm going to specifically say that they promised they would purchase 1,000 for within 12 months, and I will give them a special rate at $5 each. And that's going to be the special pricing that we're booking with any document that has a link to this blanket agreement. So if you have any questions, let us know. I will show you one that's set up, but let me finish the presentation on this blanket agreement, which has an area for documents. So any linked up documents will show up in this section. Attachments, very common tab that is used. You can attach a document into this agreement, and the recurring transactions, which we'll get into at the end of the blanket agreements, is found here, and we can create specific templates for this blanket agreement. So to show you the setup here, so that I don't, so we can see one that's active. I'll go back to the details to show you that underneath, once I set up this agreement, we do have the ability to track the cumulative amount that is committed, and the quantity, or the cumulative amount that has been already sold, and the amount that's open. We also have a drill down capability off the line row detail, that if you have agreed upon a certain sales cycle that every month, that's, according to the agreement, that's what you will be selling, you can set that up here. They have activity links at each one of these line items that you can follow up, so that you know that this agreement was met and completed. So if you need to change anything, that's where that would be. Now, again, you see the totals here. This agreement has been fulfilled partially, and we have fulfilled 300 pieces or quantity, and that went in through a sales order, that went to a delivery, and AR invoice. These are all linked. And then this quantity of 70 for a sales order is part of a recurring transactions, which I'll show you here in a second. So under the recurring transactions, I did create a recurring template that holds that 70 quantity promise that they said they would purchase or that we would sell to them. And so I created the recurring transaction so that it would just create that sales order every month. And that will be something that we'll show you next, but this is where you set that up and everything is linked here. So just to show you how everything will look in the relationship map, because this is also available to the sales blanket agreement, you see all of these documents linked back to the blanket agreement. If you go into a document, each document has a line item blanket agreement reference, which holds all of that information for the blanket agreement. Okay, so going back to, if you have any questions again, please let us know. I'm going to go over to the purchasing side to show you a monetary purchase blanket agreement. And here I'll show you, this one was set up as a monetary method. Under the monetary method, when we go to the details, we only have the ability to put in a specific amount. So this purchase blanket agreement is between the purchasing organization and your vendors, stating that you will be purchasing at least $10,000 in 12 months. And it could be anything. So anything that is tied to this blanket agreement here can be can be deducted. So there's been a $900 cumulative amount cleared. So you could see that here under documents. And that is just a purchase order. So once the AP invoice is generated, it will go ahead and show that reference. Again, there is a recurring transaction on this side as well. And I'll quickly show that, and that is for a consecutive $900 recurring, which I think it's set up quarterly. But again, this is a way to set up or negotiate agreements that are for long periods of time, special pricing, both on the purchasing side and the sales side. So I did show you some of the links there for different areas that you could see where the blanket agreements show. We do also show the reporting side under sales reports. We have a blanket fulfillment report. And that is showing us some parameters that we can select under the agreement method. That's the first one we would need to make sure we're looking at an item specific or monetary. So under the sales side, we did items. So if we run this report, we do see we have some agreements that have been fulfilled and some that have not. And we do show the open values here. So we can quickly run this agreement report and show where we are with the customer. And again, the same thing on the purchasing side, we can run a fulfillment report to show where we are on the blanket agreement under the monetary method, which is the one we created as an example. And here it's still open for 10,000 because that was a purchase order. So once that becomes an AP invoice, it will be showing a deduction. And those are all the screens available to the blanket agreement. We do have two areas that you would need to know for configuration found under system administration, system initialization, then the general settings area, and also the document settings area. So I'll pull those up quickly so that you know where they are. And they give you more flexibility to something that oh, I pulled up the wrong one. Sorry about that. So it gives you more flexibility in case you need to have different Sorry, there's a lag here. There we go. So under the BP tab, under General Settings, you have Allow Multiple Blanket Agreements for same period and enable updating unit pricing, planned quantity, and planned amounts for your blanket agreements and linked documents. There is also now one under the document settings specifically for your AR and your AP documents. And that's right off the General tab, down towards the bottom. You can block multiple blanket agreements for both AP and AR invoices or documents. Okay, so that was what I wanted to cover on blanket agreements. We'll go quickly into the recurring transactions, which are also found under sales and purchasing. So under the sales side, we have a recurring transaction template and recurring transaction. The way that this works is if you have transactions on the AR side or the AP side that require monthly, weekly, quarterly, a certain cycle to happen. And some examples we show here on the AP side would be insurance, rent, things like that you are creating an AP invoice for, and you want to set up a template. That's something you can do here. Once that's set up and the cycle is started, then they will go into the recurring transactions, and users can see that pop-up shown at login, and they can go ahead and run the transaction. So let's do one for insurance for the employer. Similar to the insurance here we have. And you can see that there's various documents. It doesn't have to be an AP invoice or an AR invoice. It could be all of these documents here that will help you not have to manage that on a daily basis. So I'm going to choose AP invoice. Then we have to create the document, and that is very similar to a draft, actually. So if you work with drafts, this is what you're creating here. We will go ahead and specify who the vendor will be. We'll put in our date. I'll leave it as a service AP invoice for insurance. And I'll select an expense GL account for a set amount. Okay, so that is done. The next thing you have to select before you save this is what's your cycle for this recurring template. So I'll go ahead and say maybe quarterly or monthly. You can even say daily. So these are all the choices you have on the first. And when do you want it to end? So we'll put it in 12 months and we hit update. Now that is part of our templates. We can now go into the recurring transactions to see this screen. This is the screen that will pop up if, as a user, you need to see what transactions need to run. Now, you won't, once you use this, you won't see all of these transactions. You will only see exactly that day, per the system date, what needs to run. So I could see the insurance right here. We also have various other ones as examples. But let's just go ahead and, so I could show you how easy this is. You just select it and you want to just click continue and execute. It just goes and creates that AP invoice for you. We could take a look at it. And it's done. Everything is set, and now it's cycled for the next month. And it disappears from your recurring transactions window. Now, if you're a user that does not need to see the recurring transactions, just make sure that under your user setup, you are not displaying this recurring transaction on execution, or else that window will appear every time you log into SAP. However, if you do need to see these transactions and that's important to you, you do want to make sure that's checked off and you're ready to use your recurring transactions. They're very simple and very beneficial so that you let the system do the work for you. And with that, I think I'm done on that side. If you want to go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you. Okay, so we just want to finalize the recurring transactions. Stated here again that they're both for sales and purchasing. They have the ability to start up when you log in to generate these documents. And they're very easy to set up and generate both AP documents and AR documents. So I think that's it then.
If I unmute myself here. Thank you, Johanna. Great.
Thank you, Ben.
Great. So we covered blanket agreements on the sales and purchasing side and reoccurring transaction with Johanna. Now we're going to hop back into SAP and we're going to cover a couple other agreement areas, specifically on the return request or RMAs and on the service contract. So let's go ahead and hop back into SAP here. Now, as of SAP version 9.3 for SAP Business One and on SQL and HANA, SAP actually added a new document called the return request, and in most worlds it's typically referred to as the RMA. And this exists again both on the sales side here as return request and on the purchasing side as well as goods return request. Now, prior to version 9.3, you only had the return document. And the reason this was a little bit cumbersome is because the return document was the only way that you could really track a return coming in, and it initiated all of the accounting and inventory changes. So you had no real way of managing, let's say with a customer when they wanted to return something, that inventory coming back into the warehouse. So it was a little bit difficult to do that because it all happened here on one document. With the addition of the return request, you now have the ability to start the return process without affecting inventory until you actually receive the item back into your warehouse. So we're going to spend a little bit of time here on the return request. And I did want to quickly note, if you're not sure what version of SAP Business One you're on, because the return request only came out again with version 9.3 and higher, you can always go up to Help and About SAP Business One, and you'll be able to see your major version number up here. And you can see we're in our HANA environment today, but we are up on version 10.0. So if you are prior to 9.3 and you'd like to start using the return request, just simply talk to your account manager or support and we can look into an upgrade. But if you already are on version 9.3 or higher, you already have all this built in. And much like all the other marketing documents in SAP, it functions the same. So you're going to be really familiar with how this flows and how this works. So we're going to start a return request here. Our customer has called in and asked to return one of the items they bought from us a couple months ago, for the reason that they simply don't need it. So we'll keep this as a pretty simple example. But we can come in here, select our customer, select an item, and we'll choose a printer here that we want to return. Price and all that populates great. So now a little part of your process that you might want to explore is, in my company, when we bring items back into the warehouse, we like to send it into a virtual warehouse first, or a special warehouse where we can retest it and make sure that it's still functional before we resell it. Especially in the case like this where the customer is just saying we don't need it anymore, there's nothing actually wrong with it, but we don't need it. We can come in here on the line level and simply change our warehouse to a different warehouse that we have set up. So we set up a new warehouse just for returns, and this is a great way to manage your inventory and keep track of these specific items before you resell them. So we're going to actually change this on the line level here and say we're going to put it back into the returns warehouse. Additionally, on the return request, we have two new fields on the line level called return reason and return action. Now, if these aren't visible for you, by default, when you first start using this, they are disabled, so they're not visible. But you can come up here to form settings, go to table format, and just simply type in return, or start typing return, and you'll see return reason, return action. You can check them to make them visible and move them up, just like you can with all the other fields using form settings in SAP. These fields are drop down and they're completely user definable. So you can always come here, define new, and define your own return reason or return action. So today we'll just say this is not needed and we're just doing the action of a return. But again, you could have a situation where you want to repair or you want to replace it or something like that. And it's a great way, one, to track that communication with your customer about why goods are coming back, but also internally so you know what's going on with this item and what needs to happen with it once it comes back. So once we have this created, again, a really standard, simple SAP document, we'll just go ahead and click Add. Now I get this pop-up here, and this is something you can configure. A lot of times when you do a return request with a customer, they call in, they say they want to return something, you enter the document with them on the phone. You can actually configure it to email them a copy of the return request because maybe you want them to include that in their packaging when they mail it back to you. So this is a great, easy way to say, okay, every return request, we're going to automatically email them a copy of the return request document so they can include that with their return. So again, you have that record of which return is this, why is it coming back to the warehouse. We're not going to send an email out today, but that is an option. So now we have our return request in there, and this is where I really want to jump into why this document is so important, especially for inventory management and inventory control. If we drill into the item master here and we go to inventory data, you're probably familiar with this screen. We have in stock, committed, ordered, and available, which is a great way so you know how much inventory you actually have to sell at one point. As I mentioned earlier, prior to the return request, when you just entered the return, it would automatically bring it back into stock without that period in between where it's really actually in transition. Meaning basically that, we haven't actually physically received it back. We know it's coming, but it's not physically in our warehouse. The return request allows you to handle it as ordered on the sales side or committed on the AP side. So in this case, we have two here. I must have an outstanding return request for the same item somewhere else, but we see it as ordered here. So this is because it's coming back into our warehouse, it's ordered, whereas if it was on the AP side, we were doing a goods return request, it would be committed because we're going to be sending inventory out of our warehouse. So again, a really visible way of seeing what's going on. And as you can see, we are bringing it back into our returns warehouse. Whether we want to QA it and send it back out, or, if we bring it back in and we find it's not functional, we could do a goods issue and get it out of that warehouse and it never goes back into our main warehouse. Of course, if we bring it back in, we test it again, it all works out great, we can do an inventory transfer to move the item from our returns warehouse back to our main warehouse. So we have this return request here, and now it comes back into our warehouse, and we sent the customer the printout of this, so we see it in the box there. Now we can just simply come in here and like all of the documents, we can copy it to a return, or if we're doing a credit memo to the customer, today we'll just go ahead and do a return here. And it just copies right to a return, just like you're used to in the regular returns process here to bring it back into inventory. And if we go back to our item master here, we'll see that it is out of the ordered column and it's in stock again in our returns warehouse. So, a great way to better manage your return process with your customer, maintain that communication, get some information on why returns are coming back, so that you know what to do with that inventory when it does come back. So a great little quick addition here, again, 9.3 or newer, that really allows you to have that that step before the actual return and before that inventory movement. Now, I did want to share another little example here with this, because like with all marketing documents in SAP, they are universally available throughout the system. So let's say in your business, you actually, for some pickups or returns, you have to go pick it up again from them. So we're going to go ahead and actually create a new service call here. And maybe this is the case where it's a big, heavy appliance. You got to send a truck out. You got to send a team out to go move it back in, or whatever it may be. So we're going to actually go do that here. And I'm going to share how this return request can be used in this type of process to begin that transactional return in your system, but also communicate to the team that has to go out and pick up the appliance. So we'll just say this is a non-functioning, and I got caps lock on, which is fine. Go make that look a little nicer. Non-functioning equipment. So in this case, we have an example of a piece of equipment in the field. It's not functioning. The customer wants to return it to us. So we can go ahead and create a service call. Again, this will be used by our team that goes out and actually picks up the equipment. But here under related documents, we can actually start the return request process or the returns process right from here. Go under related documents, click on details, and choose new document. And we get this drop down list up here where we can do AR or AP documents, and we'll choose AR. And here you see the return request. So we can choose that and click OK. And it's going to say, okay, we're going to link a return request here to this service call of the piece of equipment we want to pick up. So we'll go ahead and get this going here. So we're picking up this, and if we wanted to enter the serial number information, we could. And now in this case, maybe it's functional damage and it needs to be repaired. And again, we want to bring it back into our returns warehouse. We'll go ahead and click add. And again, we're going to get prompted if we want to email out a copy to the customer and update. But now we have an example here. Click yes to that, where we have our service call for our team to go out and pick it up, and we've already started that return request process, so we know what's going on with our inventory already, where somebody's got to go out and pick this up. They can work this service call, pick it up, bring it back, and then the return request can be copied to a return or a credit memo or whatever needs to happen. But again, depending on your business needs, if your customer is going to be shipping it back or you got to go pick it up, you do have these robust functionality to kind of manage it all within SAP and create the service calls, create the return request, and make sure you're keeping eyes on your inventory as it comes back in. Great. Now, the last thing I wanted to touch on real quick here, under reporting, the open items list, which is a really powerful report in SAP. Since, as I mentioned already, this is just a standard marketing document now, part of all reports in SAP, you do have the option to see your open return request or open goods return request, which I only have one here, just from your open items list. So again, you do get that visibility and flow within SAP for all these types of documents. Great, so that's the return request. Pretty simple, straightforward document. The other kind of agreement I wanted to talk about today is actually with the service contract. Now, several months ago, we actually did an entire webinar on the service module, and we got into the mobile apps and service calls and equipment cards and all these great things. But from the standpoint of we're going to be providing service to our customers. But what if you have a situation where you actually have a piece of equipment in-house that your team uses? Maybe it's a shop machine for manufacturing, or maybe it is just a printer in the office that's really expensive, and you have contracts with your vendors. SAP provides that availability too, to have service contracts set up in SAP on the purchasing side or with your vendors. So first I'm going to go and show you a quick equipment card, and this is just another scenario where you can use SAP to manage these types of things in-house. Up at the top here, you'll see sales or purchasing, and anytime you create a new equipment card, you do have those options. So if it's sales, obviously it's going to be for one of your customers, but if you change it to purchasing, you get the option to set it up as one of your vendors is the owner of the machine or providing service for that machine. So I do have one set up here, where it's for a vendor, C Corp, and it's the laser printer they have in our office here. So we have their serial numbers and that type of information. And this is just a printer that sits in our office, and we can say it's located in main display room, just so we know where the location is. And now we're tracking these equipments that we have in-house that we don't sell, but we use on a daily basis internally, and we can actually link them to service contracts here. So now when our vendor, maybe they come out and provide service on the equipment we have in-house, or maybe we have special agreements with them on how, when they provide service, we can set up a service contract again on the purchasing side for that vendor. And here under the General tab, we can enter their response time and their resolution time so that we have an accurate understanding of what the agreed to SLA is with that vendor. So we know, okay, they're supposed to respond to us in 4 hours about an issue, and it's supposed to be fixed in 5 days if we do have an issue. Here under items, we can link the piece of equipment we have with them. We can enter up here in the header and on the line level the start and end dates of the contract. So maybe this is a yearly contract we sign with them that they come out and service this machine for us. We can have that sort of information loaded here. And we can list multiple pieces of equipment if they service multiple pieces of equipment for us. We can have person we contact for service as well. Here under coverages, we have Monday through Sunday, but maybe they don't provide service on Saturday and Sunday, and maybe on Friday they end by 3 p.m. This is 24-hour time, but that's fine. So we have a record here of, okay, when can we actually call them for service? When do we know they'll actually come out? And maybe they do provide service on holidays, so we know if we have an issue over, Thanksgiving or something like that, that they will come out and service the machine still. Now here under attachments, this would be a great place if you actually have a physical copy of the contract you signed with the vendor. You can put it here so that, again, your team, when they're calling for service, they have all this information right here in SAP Business One. They can communicate to the vendor to have them come service the machine and check the contract details. If you really wanted to, you could keep a track of all the service calls the vendor comes out and does on the machine, so you have a record of that as well. And then finally, recurring transaction, which we've already talked about. Maybe you pay a monthly service fee for this machine. So you can then link that type of service fee. Maybe you pay, $100 a month for unlimited service on this machine or whatever it may be. We can set that up as a recurring transaction in SAP, link it to this service contract, and then every month we get a notice that we got to send a AP invoice or create an AP invoice to pay this vendor for service, so that we're always on time, we're always on top of our agreements and making sure that that's all being tracked here in SAP Business One. So another really maybe useful aspect of the service contract, to make sure that you have that type of data inside SAP, your team can utilize it, you can utilize it, and keep up on those agreements that you have with your vendors. Okay. Any questions at this time? I have one notification, but I don't know. I do have one question here. We'll get back to that in 1 second there, Lauren. So I want to hop back over into the PowerPoint so we can wrap up a few items here. We talked about service contracts. Reporting, Johanna had talked about the blanket agreement fulfillment report. I talked about the open items list. That confirmation of recurring transactions, that can pop up every morning when you first log in, so you know when your recurring transactions need to be processed, and you create those documents. And then there is a pretty standard report for service contracts that you can run to see or look up different service contracts that you have with customers or vendors. As always, bunch of documentation options. YouTube is a great place, especially SAP Business One has a channel specifically for all their functionality. So there's some links here to blanket agreements and RMAs. The Pioneer B1 Tips and Tricks LinkedIn page is available as well. And then finally, on the Pioneer B1 website, there's a whole documentation section on how-tos. And then, as always, Google's the SAP Business One community is very large. There's always a ton of information and questions asked that can be found on how different things work within SAP. And then, as always, our support team is available as well. So in summary today, we covered blanket agreements, which were those more long-term agreements with customers or vendors to purchase certain quantities or certain amounts. We talked about recurring transactions, which can be set up as templates so that you always are paying or creating documents at the right time of the month, whether it's for rent or service agreements that you have with your customers. We talked about the RMA, the return request and goods return request, or return materials authorization, depending on what you're used to calling it, which is really that starting point for the returns process, so that we can better track the inventory coming back into our warehouse and manage returned items more efficiently and effectively. We talked about service contracts from the standpoint of if you are going to have a contract with a vendor who actually provides service to you as a company, you can set that up in SAP. Throughout today, we did touch on a little bit of reporting options out of the box with SAP, and the last slide was just documentation. So with that, we got About 15 minutes left here to the top of the hour. So we'll open it up for questions or any other additional comments. We'd like to thank you all for joining today. Our emails are at the bottom there if anybody has any questions for us later on. But there is one question in the chat. From Lauren, does SAP automatically link AR invoices or other documents created to the existing blanket agreement? Or do you have to manually specify it? Johanna, regarding the blanket agreements.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lauren. You can start from the blanket agreement and link your SAP documents automatically. If you have multiple documents, you can specify them as you just have to go into the row level and go to format settings. Make the blanket agreement number visible in your row level, and you could select the blanket agreement that that document will link to. So, I mean, it automatically will select it if there's only one default in the system and all the criteria meets, or if you're coming off of the blanket agreement, there's ways to create documents from there. However, if you have multiple agreements, then it'll be more of a manual process, and you can select those inside of the documents.
Great. Thank you, Johanna.
You're welcome.
Any other questions at this time? No? Okay. Well, our emails for Johanna and myself are here at the bottom of the screen. If you do have questions later on, feel free to email us. This recording will be uploaded to YouTube. I'm actually going to go ahead and stop the recording now.